Reading through the Bible in a year, January 27th, Genesis 28, Matthew 27, Esther chapter 4, and Acts 27. So Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him and said to him, "You shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan. Arise, go to Paddan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and from there take to yourself a wife from the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. May God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, so that you may become a company of peoples. May he also give you the blessing of Abraham, to you and to your descendants with you, that you may possess the land of your sojournings, which God gave to Abraham." Then Isaac sent Jacob away, and he went to Paddan Aram, to Laban, son of Bethuel, the Aramean, the brother of Rebekah, the mother of Jacob and Esau. Now Esau saw that that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Paddan Aram to take for himself a wife from there. And that when he blessed him, he charged him, saying, "You shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan." And that Jacob had obeyed his father and mother and gone to Paddan Aram. So Esau saw that the daughters of Canaan displeased his father Isaac. And Esau went to Ishmael and married. Besides the wives that he had, Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebaioth. Then Jacob departed from Beersheba and went toward Haran. He came to a certain place and spent the night there, because the sun had set. And he took one of the stones of the place and put it under his head and lay down in that place. And he had a dream. And behold, a ladder was set on the earth with its top reaching to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, Yahweh stood above it and said, "I am Yahweh, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give it to you and to your descendants. Your descendants will also be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east and the north and to the south. And in you and in your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and I will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you." Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, "Surely Yahweh is in this place, and I did not know it." And he was afraid and said, "How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven." So Jacob rose early in the morning and took that stone that he had put under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on its top. And he called the name of that place Bethel, meaning house of God. However, previously the name of the city had been Luz. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, "If God will be with me and keep me on this journey that I take, and will give me food to eat and garments to wear, and I return to my father's house in safety, then Yahweh will be my God. This stone which I have set up as a pillar will be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will surely give a tenth to you." Pulling up the rest of the notes here for you. There are, again, quite a few in this section. There we go. Moving on to Matthew 27. Now, when morning came, all the chief priests and the elders of the people conferred together against Jesus to put him to death. And they bound him and led him away and delivered him to Pilate the governor. Then, when Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that he had been condemned, he felt remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood." But they said, "What is that to us? See to it yourself." And he threw the pieces of silver into the temple sanctuary and departed. Then he went away and hanged himself. The chief priests took the pieces of silver and said, "It's not lawful to put them into the temple treasury, since it is the price of blood," or blood money. They conferred together, and with the money bought the potter's field as a burial place for strangers. For this reason, that field has been called Adokama, or field of blood, to this day. Then that which was spoken through Jeremiah the prophet was fulfilled. And they took the 30 pieces of silver, the price of the one whose price had been set by the sons of Israel, and they gave them for the potter's field, as the Lord directed me. Now Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor questioned him, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said to him, "It is as you say." And while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he did not answer. Then Pilate said to him, Do you not hear how many things they testify against you? He did not answer. He did not answer him with regard to even a single charge. So the governor was quite amazed. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to release for the people any one prisoner for whom they asked. At that time, they were holding a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. So when the people gathered together, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release for you, Barabbas or Jesus?" He's giving them the worst of the worst. He's saying this horrible guy that everybody agrees is probably the worst person on the earth, or Jesus, who they don't like for political reasons. For he knew that it was because of envy that they had handed him over. And while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife had sent him a message saying, "Have nothing to do with that righteous man. For last night I suffered terribly, greatly in a dream because of him." But the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to put Jesus to death. But the governor said to them, which of the two do you want me to release for you? And they said, "Barabbas." And Pilate said to them, "Then what shall I do with Jesus, who is called Christ?" Which again means anointed one. That's a messianic title. And they all said, "Crucify him." And he said, "Why? What evil has he done?" But they kept shouting all the more, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" When Pilate saw that he was accomplishing nothing, but rather that a riot was starting, he took water and washed his hands in front of the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood. See to that yourselves." And all the people said, "His blood shall be on us and on our children." Then he released Barabbas for them. But after having Jesus scourged, he handed him over to be crucified. Then the soldiers of the governor took Jesus into the praetorium and gathered the whole Roman cohort around him. And they stripped him and put on a scarlet robe on him. And after twisting together a crown of thorns, they put it on his head, and they put a reed in his right hand, and they knelt down before him and mocked him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" They spat on him and took the reed and began to beat him on the head. And after they had mocked him, they took the scarlet robe off of him and put his own garments on him and led him away to crucify him. As they were coming out, they found a man of Cyrene named Simon, whom they pressed into service to bear his cross. When they came to the place called Golgotha, which means place of a skull, they gave him wine to drink mixed with gall, and after tasting it, he was unwilling to drink it. And when they had crucified him, they divided up his garments among themselves by casting lots, and sitting down, they began to watch over him there. And above his head they put up the charge against him, which reads, "This is Jesus, the King of the Jews." At that time 2 robbers were crucified with him, one on the right and one on the left. And those who were passing by were hurling abuse at him, wagging their heads, and saying, "You, who are going to destroy the temple and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." In the same way, the chief priests also, along with the scribes and elders, were mocking him, saying, "He saved others and he cannot save himself. He is the King of Israel. Let him now come down from the cross, and then we will believe in him. He trusts in God. Let God rescue him now if he delights in him. For he said, 'I am the Son of God.'" The robbers who had been crucified with him were also insulting him with the same words. Now from the 6th hour, noon, darkness fell upon the land until the 9th hour, so 3 p.m. About the 9th hour, again, this is normally the hottest, brightest part of the day. About the 9th hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, "Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani?" That is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Some of those who were standing there, when they heard it, began saying, This man is calling for Elijah." And immediately one of them ran, and taking a sponge, he filled it with sour wine and put it on a reed and gave him a drink. But the rest of them said, whoa, hold on, let's see whether Elijah will come to save him. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. Behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two, from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. Bit of a note here. There's some notes on this here, but I'm going to go ahead and just sum it up for you. First, we haven't gotten there yet, so you don't really know what the veil is, unless you've read through this yourself. So the veil is this thick piece of fabric, and its whole purpose, because the temple itself, if you are standing directly in front, you can see straight into the thing. There's one room and then the second room behind it. The first one is the holy place. That's the first room. That's where most of the work is done. But once a year, the priest has to go into the Holy of Holies, the holiest place in the entire temple complex, where the Ark of the Covenant is and where the Shekinah glory of God rests above the Ark itself. And he goes in there wearing the full outfit that represents, it's basically covering him in a representation of the 12 tribes of Israel, so that the wrath of God would look at him and remember the 12 tribes resting on him. And he has, everything is very symbolic about it. He's got a turban on his head with a gold nameplate on it that says right on it, "Holy to the Lord," right? And he walks in carrying a bowl full of the blood from the guilt offering on the Day of Atonement, on Yom Kippur. And he goes in and he sprinkles the blood on top of the mercy seat, which is the lid of the Ark of the Covenant of God. All very symbolic. But you can see straight into that place. So there's this veil that was put up between them, not like a thin veil. It's this thick curtain, right? And the entire complex, it's very tall. So as he goes into it, this huge, heavy curtain, the minute that Jesus dies, that curtain that separates the holy place of God from view of the people is torn in two, from the top to the bottom. If you're going to tear something, it's typically torn from the side that you can reach. So it's as if the angels of God themselves tore this entire curtain, this thick, layered piece of fabric, from top to bottom, symbolizing that God has now opened up so people have direct access to the Holy of Holies. It's torn all the way through. At the same moment, what else is happening? There's a massive earthquake that takes place on the earth. Rocks are split in half. The tombs were opened, and many bodies of the saints, these are Christians who have fallen, quote, fallen asleep. Remember, that's that Christian euphemism for death. They were raised up. And coming out of the tombs after his resurrection, this comes later, they entered the holy city and appeared to many. Now the centurion and those who were with him keeping guard over Jesus, when they saw the earthquake and the things that were happening, became very frightened and said, truly, this was the Son of God. Note the ones who actually are recognizing it immediately are Gentiles. Many women were there looking on from a distance who had followed Jesus from Galilee while ministering to him. Among them was Mary Magdalene, and Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of the sons of Zebedee. This Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, that's Jesus' mother. When it was evening, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who had himself become a disciple of Jesus. And this man went to Pilate and asked for the body of Jesus. Then Pilate ordered it to be given to him. And Joseph took the body and wrapped it in a clean linen cloth, and laid it in his own new tomb, which had been hewn out in the rock. And he rolled a large stone against the entrance of the tomb and went away. and Mary Magdalene was there, and the other Mary, sitting opposite the grave. Now, on the next day, the day after the preparation, the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered together with Pilate and said, "Sir, remember that when he was alive, that deceiver said, 'After 3 days I am to rise again.' Therefore, give orders for the grave to be made secure until the 3rd day. Otherwise, his disciples may come and steal him away and say to the people, 'He has risen from the dead.' And the last deception will be worse than the first." Pilate said to them, "You have a guard. Go, make it as secure as you know how." And they went and made the grave secure, and along with the guard, they set up a seal on the stone. Moving on now to Esther chapter 4. When Mordecai learned all that had been done, he tore his clothing, put on sackcloth and ashes. These are, it's basically the lowest form of clothing. Covering yourself in ash makes you appear to be one with the dust. Basically, that's what it's for. The point is to make yourself as humble as humanly possible. I mean, could you imagine people in Hollywood when their homes are burning in repentance to God, tearing their Armani suits and whatever, and throwing them away and covering themselves in just destroyed clothing and rubbing on themselves the ashes and openly before all the people, not caring about what people think of them, just weeping and pouring out their heart to God in repentance. This is what is happening. This is the point. So every time you see somebody in the Bible, and there's plenty of times it's mentioned, where somebody tears their clothing and then they put on sackcloth and ashes, this is the point being made. And Mordecai then went out into the midst of the city and wailed loudly and bitterly. And he went as far as the king's gate, for no one was to enter the king's gate clothed in sackcloth. In each and every province where the commanded decree of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay on sackcloth and ashes. Then Esther's maidens and her eunuchs came and told her, and the queen writhed in great anguish, and she sent garments to clothe Mordecai that he might remove his sackcloth from him, but he did not accept them. Then Esther summoned Hathach from the king's eunuchs, whom the king had appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why it was. So Hathach went to Mordecai, to the city square in front of the king's gate. And Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and the exact amount of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasuries for the destruction of the Jews. And he also gave him a copy of the text of the edict, which had been issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show Esther and inform her, and to order her to go to the king to implore his favor and to plead with him for her people. Hathach came back and related Mordecai's words to Esther. Then Esther spoke to Hathach and ordered him to reply to Mordecai, "All the king's servants and all the king's provinces know that for any man or woman who comes to the king to the inner court who is not summoned, he has but one law, that he be put to death, unless the king holds out to him the golden scepter so that he may live. And I have not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days. They related Esther's word to Mordecai. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Do not imagine that you and the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this?" Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go, assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens also will fast in the same way. And thus I will go to the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish." So Mordecai went away and did just as Esther had commanded him. Now to Acts 27. When it was decided that we would set sail for Italy, they proceeded to deliver Paul and some of the other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking in an Adramyttian ship, starting over, verse 2, and embarking at an Adramyttian ship, which was about to sail to the regions along the coast of Asia, we put out to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, Macedonia and Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul with consideration and allowed him to go to his friends and receive care. From there we put out to sea and sailed under the shelter of Cyprus because the winds were contrary. When we had sailed through the sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we landed at Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy, and he put us aboard it. When we had sailed slowly for a good many days, making sure we don't lose notes here. When we had sailed slowly for a good many days, and with difficulty had arrived off of Cnidus, since the wind did not permit us to go farther, we sailed under the shelter of Crete off Salmone. And with difficulty, sailing past it, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lasea. When considerable time had passed and the voyage was now dangerous, since even the fast was already over, Paul began to admonish them and said to them, "Men, I perceive that the voyage will certainly be with damage and great loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives." But the centurion was more persuaded by the pilot and the captain of the ship than what was being said by Paul. Because the harbor was not suitable for wintering, the majority reached a decision to put out to sea from there, if somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. When a modest south wind came up, supposing that they had attained their purpose, they weighed anchor and began sailing along Crete, close inshore. But before very long, there rushed down from the land a violent wind called Orachilo, or a northeaster. And when the ship was caught in it and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and let ourselves be driven along. Running under the shelter of a small island called Clauda, we were scarcely able to get the ship's boat under control. After they had hoisted it up, they used supporting cables in undergirding the ship, and fearing that they might run aground on the shallows of Syrtis, they let down the sea anchor, and in this way let themselves be driven along. The next day, as we were being violently storm-tossed, they began to jettison the cargo, and on the third day they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. Since neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small storm was assailing us, from then on, all hope of our being saved was gradually abandoned. When they had gone a long time without food, then Paul stood up in their midst and said, "Men, you ought to have followed my advice and not to have set sail from Crete and incurred this damage and loss. Yet now I urge you to keep your courage, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night, an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood before me, saying, 'Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar, and behold, God has granted you all those who are sailing with you. Therefore, keep up your courage, men, for I believe God that it will turn out exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island, or on a certain island.' When the 14th night came, and as we were being driven about in the Adriatic Sea, about midnight the sailors began to surmise that they were approaching some land. And they took soundings and found it to be 20 fathoms. A little farther on, they took another sounding and found it to be 15 fathoms. Fearing that we might run aground somewhere on the rocks, they cast 4 anchors from the stern and wished for daybreak. But as the sailors were trying to escape from the ship and had let down the ship's boat into the sea on pretense of intending to lay out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurions and to the soldiers, Unless these men remain in the ship, you yourselves cannot be saved." Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it fall away. Until the day was about to dawn, Paul was encouraging them all to take some food, saying, "Today is the 14th day that you have been constantly watching and going without eating, having taken nothing. Therefore I encourage you to take some food, for this is for your preservation. For not a hair from the head of any of you will perish." Having said this, he took bread and gave thanks in the presence of God. Gave thanks to God in the presence of all, and he broke it and began to eat. All of them were encouraged, and they themselves also took food. All of us in the ship were 276 persons. When they had eaten enough, they began to lighten the ship by throwing out the wheat into the sea. When day came, they could not recognize the land, but they did observe a bay with a beach, and they resolved to drive the ship into it if they could. Casting off the anchors, they left them in the sea, while at the same time they were loosening the ropes of the rudders, and hoisting the foresail to the wind, they were heading for the beach. But striking a reef where two seas met, they ran the vessel aground, and the prow stuck fast and remained immovable. But the stern began to be broken up by the force of the waves. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners so that none of them would swim away and escape. But the centurion, wanting to bring Paul safely through, kept them from their intention and commanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land, and the rest should follow on some planks and other various things from the ship. And so it happened that they were all brought safely to land. And that's it. That's all the reading and all of the notes for today. God willing, we'll be back tomorrow. Behold the word of the Lord.